All right, podcast universe. Welcome back to the Cyber Savvy podcast. I am your host, Mike Shelah. And remember that the Cyber Savvy podcast is powered by DTC. To learn more about us, go to www.dtctoday.com. And remember, at DTC, we make IT work. We're continuing our conversation with insurance expert extraordinaire, Mr. Stephen Heller. Stephen, that was a great segment that we did with you. And I want to start today's conversation by saying everything that you said applies to cybersecurity insurance. And cybersecurity insurance is interesting in that when it first became prevalent 7 or 8 years ago, the industry treated it very much like the other insurances in the marketplace as far as qualifying. There was a fairly low barrier to entry. And then COVID hit and smacked the insurance industry in the face, and they radically redesigned the how. And you just started talking about that in the last segment. So I guess to set the table, people say, well, Mike, what do you care about cybersecurity insurance? You're a managed IT company. Here's the thing. Managed IT has evolved tremendously, particularly in the last 5 years as a result of COVID. If you go back to 2019, your typical IT company would set up a firewall for you in your business. They would set up antivirus on your computers, and they would make sure that they're patched and updated. You're getting the latest version of Windows or whatever operating system your computer's running. And beyond that, your IT company would say, hey, something breaks, call us. And depending on what plan you signed up for, that may be included in your monthly rate, or you may be paying in 15-minute increments for that support on an on-demand basis. That was the IT industry. Now, unfortunately, I would say roughly 75-80% of IT companies still operate that way. But when COVID hit, it changed the model because now not everybody was in the office, so not everybody was behind a firewall. So we had, it's the castle and moat design, meaning you have a castle, big, strong wall, you've got a moat surrounding the castle, you're protected. Well, if an invader tricks someone into lowering the gate and walks right in, everyone knows the story of the Trojan horse. That's why they call them Trojan horses in the IT world, because that's literally how it works. Now, Trojan horse has gotten much more sophisticated. There's phishing and there's skimming, and you can get it through a text message, so you can get schmissing. I mean, there's a ton of them out there, and that has evolved the cyber insurance industry as well. So talk to us about your experiences with that over the last 5 years and the revolution that it's gone through.
I go back to talk about, again, going back to fundamentals. It's when things get really complicated and confusing, quite honestly, you go back to fundamentals. And fundamentals here talk about going back to the definition of what insurance is, transfer of risk, right? So you're basically saying, hey, listen, I don't want to cover this risk. I don't want to cover this exposure. Financially, we want to defer this to a third party. That's the insurance company. Hence, we talk about transfer of risk. And in return for that transfer of risk, there's obviously a cost to that, which is your premium. So that's just at a very basic fundamental level. But there's a lot really to unpack just in that statement, because when you're transferring risk, that risk actually has to be understood, number one, in order to price it. And this opens up the dialogue of, in my opinion, why cyber insurance is complicated to understand, complicated to price. I think carriers today, where they were 5 years ago, I think 5 years they had more of their predictive modeling of what they thought would be an adequate way of pricing policies. But come to find out,
not so much.
Not so much. And that's where I feel that carriers today are kind of scratching their head and saying, look, we believe that in cyber events are insurable. I don't think that's in question. Mm-hmm. I think what we're seeing today, to your point, where we were 5 years ago, is going back to the information needed to understand the risk, i.e. the insurance application, what you're testifying to. If that 5 years ago, that language was a lot broader and simpler. And so instead of maybe 30 questions that you may not be familiar with, only maybe an MSP or a professional could really understand, back 5 years ago, you probably didn't need that. And you probably could answer those questions, and insurance companies would price your cyber risk based on a few questions. But how it's evolved today is insurance companies are saying, wait a minute, we're not exiting the cyber market, but we need to understand what we're covering and what we're not going to cover. And this gets into the larger conversation around when we're putting policies together, or if a business is out there trying to procure cyber coverage. It's really important to understand what the conditions are. Because if we're not adhering to those conditions, oh, by the way, the insurance application today will detail if you're going to meet those or not by a series of yes/no questions. And that's why I always caution that when completing a cyber application, that it's really, really important to engage your managed service provider or a professional who can help you understand those yes/no questions. So how it's evolved, coming back to your question, is the coverages are still in place here. But to qualify for those coverages is a different conversation and may require companies to make more investments in order for that coverage to respond in the event of an incident.
Yeah, I love that. And I want to set the table for this next piece by giving a little bit of behind the scenes for what you just described. So in the IT world, cybersecurity compliance has existed for a long time. Most people have heard the term HIPAA. Now, HIPAA is for the medical industry, and it's not exclusive to cybersecurity. Like, there are a lot of non-cyber rules that come around HIPAA for medical offices. Now, fun fact, if you do business with a medical office and you have access to some of their medical records, well, then you need to follow HIPAA as well. So if you think about your local public school, your local private school, colleges, they are all supposed to follow HIPAA because there's a school nurse that has access to your personal health information, which is what HIPAA wraps itself around. So if you look at cybersecurity insurance, it is the baby brother or baby sister of a cybersecurity compliance framework. And here's why I say that. The National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST for short, in Montgomery County, Maryland, for you folks listening, was developed during the Obama administration, a platform called NIST 800-171. And this was created as a best practice guideline for any business to follow. So medical's supposed to follow HIPAA. Retailers are supposed to follow PCI for credit cards. Sarbanes-Oxley's out there for the financial industry, and there's 20 other compliance ones for the finance industry. But most industries have something specific to them. But if you don't, following the NIST 800-171 guidelines is good for any business. Now, there are 110 requirements to be benchmarked for NIST 800-171. And the interesting thing is, as you said earlier, yes or no questions. Well, if you answer yes to one, that might satisfy 3 of the other requirements. If you answer no to one, well, now you've opened up 5 other things that you have to do instead. So it becomes this balancing act of, okay, well, I don't do this, so I now need to do these 3 other things to satisfy that requirement. And if we look at cybersecurity insurance, and I've seen a few policies in my time, I know some of the things they're asking about are, does your business have a firewall that is managed and updated by a third party? So it's not your nephew Billy doing it, but you've hired a trained professional to curate this device for you. Same thing with your laptops. Same thing with your servers. Do your wireless access points have a custom password and not the default password that they came with out of the box? One of the most interesting stories that I have to share from my career in IT is I was meeting with a gentleman who was the CIO of a logistics company. So they helped import-export cars in the United States. So they had an office here in Maryland, which was their headquarters, and they had offices in Florida for ports, and they had offices in California for ports. They had ordered new cybersecurity cameras, IP-enabled, for their California port so that they could monitor traffic coming in and out, not only of their gate, but the boats that come in and out for a security purpose. They bought the camera off of Amazon. The camera had firmware, so it had capabilities built into it that was automatically sending information back to Korea. Now, they were completely unaware of this until they set the camera up, they connected it to their system, and one of their other cybersecurity protocols triggered, hey, this is sending information to someplace that we have not authorized. So when you talk about the average business owner walking down the street trying to read a cybersecurity insurance policy, right, and saying, do I have a FIPS certified firewall? Do I have multi-factor authentication? Do I have remote detection and response? Sure, I do. Yes. Right. Is that sort of the challenges that you're seeing when you're in the marketplace? Because you made a very interesting comment to me about how you handle cyber insurance with people that don't have MSPs.
Yeah, I mean, again, this is sort of, again, if you're not familiar and you haven't procured cyber insurance, oftentimes I feel the approach is somewhat expedited to the detriment potentially of the coverage that we're trying to procure. And so that's why you have to, in my opinion, help the client understand that process. Hey, before you complete this, right, make sure that, you have a consultant or the questions that you're answering are going to be claim impactful. Not to be repetitive, but that's what we'll do. Is it's important to slow the process down, just so we can have an understanding that this is not something, this is to be completed with accuracy to the best of your knowledge. When you look at the ability at the end of the day for the policy to respond, one of the things, and it says very clearly, is when were you notified of that event? There is a specific requirement. It's very broadly written, and it's in the conditions of the policy. And it reads something like, do you have knowledge of anything that may give rise to a potential claim? Are there incidences that prior to procuring this coverage that you are aware of that may be actually claim impactful at the time of loss? And so this is where it's really, really important, again, with the consultation of a professional. And again, we're not here to misrepresent. We're here to make sure that that testament is represented accurately at the time of loss. So to that extent, coming back and making sure, because here's the other thing that's important and gets a little confusing, is that cyber coverage, for the most part, is what they call a claims-made policy. And there's two different types of policies, and they are different in the way they respond. You have claims made in occurrence, and quickly there is the cyber coverage is a claims-made policy. That means that when the claim is reported, the carrier at the time that the loss is reported is going to be responsible for covering that loss. So let's just play the tape a little bit. If you were aware that there was a prior event that may give rise to a claim and you failed to notify, well, the carrier may deny coverage just based on the grounds that, hey, you never disclosed that to us. And so it's really important under claims-made policies that when we put together these programs for businesses, that we look at not only go forward, they call it an inception date. The inception date on the policy is a critical date because that defines, are we covering losses from this date going forward? However, we can't ignore any of the prior events that may have occurred or could give rise to a claim. And so that's where it's important to identify if there are any incidents that you are aware of, that we disclose that. Oh, and by the way, that doesn't mean we're not going to be able to obtain coverage. The carriers will oftentimes just do a carve out for that event and say, hey, if anything materializes here, we're not covering this, because going back to what you were saying, Mike, it's kind of a pre-existing situation. So what they'll do is they'll do a named event on that policy saying, but going forward, we're going to be able to provide what they call prior acts coverage. So in all of this, it's really important to understand that there is cause and effect, both on a go-forward basis, but we want to look at all of the events that could surface that we're not made aware. And all of that is discussion for coverage when we put together a plan.
Yeah, and I think one of the questions that you and I hear frequently, we hear the opposite sides of it. So somebody's going to say to me, well, Mike, if I have cyber insurance, what the heck do I need you for? Or they're going to say to you, Steve, well, I have an IT company. What do I need you for, Steve? And the short answer to that is we're and both. We're not either or, because what my company's going to do is we're going to move your risk from a 1 in 5 likelihood of a cyber attack to like 1 in 100. I can't eliminate it. I can reduce it dramatically. Equally important, when a bad thing happens, I'm taking your impact down to hours instead of days or weeks, which from a revenue generation standpoint for a business can be the difference between staying in business and not. And then on your side, despite all of the tools and technology that I put in place to protect the client, there's going to be an element where they may need you, because I know part of some of the insurance policies is incident response and negotiating with ransomware people. So, talk to us a little bit about what they're paying for when those things can happen.
Yeah, you are in essence, when your business has a cyber attack, it's going to affect a lot of different areas. Number one, to your point, can our business actually operate? And what coverages do we have in place to make sure that, to your point, if it's a ransomware, which, by the way, as a side note, maybe we're all guilty of this to some extent, like it can never happen to me. But I can tell you at the small business level, it's happening, and it's happening every day. And oftentimes I'll hear, well, we're not really concerned because everything's on a third-party server and everything's backed up and we can, well, let me tell you, if you go through a ransomware attack, that's going to be very disruptive for your business. And what comes with the policy is a team of people. You're actually paying for people and resources that are going to help you negotiate if there is a ransomware attack. These people are going to help you work with your MSP in restoring the data. Your carrier, again, those are people that are going to help value any business interruption. And by the way, as a side note, when you look at real business interruption, this could really cripple a company. And so when you look at direct cause of loss versus dependent relationships, we call it business interruption, and then contingent business interruption. Contingent meaning, oh, my third party provider, we lost our data there. Well, and we can't operate. So we're going to need third party contingent business interruption. So it's really important to really look at all of this. But I go back to where it all starts, right? A lot of it, where it starts mostly when we look at events that occur, it starts with first party at the employee level. And Mike, you know this all too well, working with companies, is that it's really important to make sure that the employee is trained. You know, they have all these wonderful resources. Oh, and by the way, as an employer, I will admit this. I want to spend, all my employees spend 10 hours of their time going through like a know before you go or similar trainings that will help protect the company. Well, in the beginning, I was like, no, this is just kind of frivolous. But I have to say to you, this is critical, that we have to get our employees compliant, because whether they're using the data of the company, that's company property, or they're using their mobile phones, it's all open, it's all vulnerable. And so it's really, really important that we train the employees of what's acceptable, what's not acceptable during work, how you use company property. And so that will lend itself to helping protect the companies, because I go back to the reason why we see cyber events today. It's because our employees were the ones that are precipitating, not intentionally, but we're the ones that are precipitating these incidents to occur. And that's why you go back to your companies that are more HIPAA driven, right? So a lot of times we will receive the question, well, what limits are we going to need, right? How do we build the right coverage? Well, I understand some of that conversation is, hey, we just have a contract and we're trying to do business with XYZ Corporation, and they're the ones that are requiring coverage.
Yeah.
But okay, and I get that. But there's a point in time, going back to investing in the right coverage, where if I'm in a HIPAA sensitive business, which I would agree most of us are to some extent, just saying.
Yes, I agree with you too, by the way.
It's important to look at the cost of notification. You have to notify all of your clients, past and present. And there could be some regulatory compliance, and oftentimes there will be, and that comes with a legal expense, because we're going to have to develop these legal disclosures that are going to go out to all the clients, explaining to them what has occurred, but more importantly, how are we going to remedy it? So going back to first party, looking at notification expense, looking at business interruption, make sure we have enough business interruption. And by the way, do we understand that there are deductibles here? And as it relates to deductibles, it could be a flat deductible. It could be a waiting period. Oh, we have to wait 48 hours for our coverage to start. So having that knowledge of the specifics of the coverage, and then equally, if not more important, like we've been discussing, what are those conditions? And so when we're looking at building these policies, we have to match coverage and condition. Okay, we're applying for this business interruption, or we're applying for this HIPAA coverage, or we need a third-party liability coverage to be at $10 million because we have exposure here. But again, the carriers are going to want to come back to folks like yourself, Mike, of saying, hey, multi-factor, two-way communication. How are we protecting our phones? How are we protecting our data? And do we have the right training programs? Because this goes back to what I was saying earlier is here's our key differentiator is how do we attract more carriers to compete for your business? And I say that not in a way that we're looking for the lowest price. It could be because the carrier may not be comfortable in offering you the coverage that you are requesting. So building your plan, building
your best case.
Yeah.
Yeah. Love that. You and I share that sentiment that so much of what we do is revenue protection and brand protection. If I just do simple math on a small business that generates $2.4 million a year in revenue, there's roughly 240 business days in a calendar year, when you take out the holidays and stuff like that. So that's about $10,000 a day in revenue that a company that size generates. Now, that $10,000, somewhere between $8,500 and $9,000 is already spoken for because it's the operational expenses. It's your payroll. It's the keeping the lights on. It's all the things that make your business run, your raw cost of goods, as it were. And if you have a cyber attack, IBM just put out a report that at least 30% of cyber attacks disable a company for 50 days or longer. Mm-hmm. I was stunned when I saw that it was that long.
Yeah.
And as you put, now, are they completely out? Is there a segment of their business out? And that's where your industry and my industry working hand in hand becomes incredibly valuable to the customer because, maybe I have them disabled for a couple of hours instead of a couple of days or a couple of weeks. People like to talk about the incident response at Target and how the CIO got fired for that. They locked that incident response down in just over 24 hours. But because the sheer size of their company was a huge exposure to thousands of people from a credit card perspective. And that's ultimately, so a relatively short window, because I think we would all agree 24 hours is not a long period of time. But the damage that the hacker was able to do in that short period of time. So incident response, it's not just about what we do as the IT company, but it really is about what your team is doing, what the policy is capable of doing, and how proactive it can be to jump in and support the client in the hour of need.
And from that perspective, Mike, I feel that if we can start to really understand that part of it, mm-hmm. we've accomplished a lot.
Yeah.
And I don't want that to be anecdotal either. It's just, I think that that's just the reality of it. The other thing that I do see that is oftentimes overlooked, and it could be somewhat misunderstood, is the understanding of what intellectual property is as it relates to innovation. And as artificial intelligence continues to take hold, we see this as being more and more of an area of interest. When you talk to a business, and one of the things that I will ask them is there any technology that you actually innovate, that you've created? Because I would argue the majority of us are users of technology. But I can tell you at the small business level, there's a smaller segment of companies that are actually innovating technology. But in all of the discussion that goes on, oftentimes this is missed. And so the reason why I bring up artificial intelligence is because when you look at if you are the innovator, and you receive a cease and desist because that happened to a client of ours last year. And at the time of claim, we had what they call intellectual property. It's a more of an errors and omissions. They call it technology errors and omissions. Very important. I'm not saying it applies to the majority, but I can tell you as companies start to continue to innovate, right? These startups start to innovate, and you're creating technology that's proprietary to you, what large or small companies. It's really, really important to understand that to protect that intellectual property through within that cyber insurance protection is really important. The other thing that I feel is really important as well is media liability. This is your reputation. So now we have a breach, and now we have the social media response, and that social media response is unfavorable based on what you as a company failed to protect.
Yeah.
Now your reputation, right, wrong, or indifferent. So we look at what they call media liability to come in and help the company. So if there's a lawsuit that's filed against the company and there's reputation harm, that there will be coverage there. But again, it's not a one size fits all, Mike. I think that's what I would like the listeners to understand.
So much nuance to it.
There is, and again, you just kind of have to size it up. And as the conversation comes full circle, the due diligence up front. What are you doing today? Oh, well, we're not doing anything. Okay, well, that's a start. I mean, it's not like
you're being honest.
Yeah, right. It doesn't mean we're not going to be able to help. We may need to put some protocols in place before that process starts, but at the end of the day, to help companies, again, going back to where this conversation started, it's not a one size fits all. We want your premium dollars that you're investing into this policy, that at the time of claim of loss, that it's going to respond based on your understanding. And if we have that, then I feel like we've succeeded.
Steve, as you mentioned in the green room, you and I could talk all day about this stuff. I might just have to have you back on the show just to do a segment on intellectual property and media liability, because that actually came up in a conversation I had with a marketing client the other day. A woman owns marketing company, and she was talking about how yes, they have employee data and customer data, but if they were to lose their IP, the things they've created for their customers, that would put them months behind, and you could functionally shut their business down. So Stephen, one more time, thank you so much. Please tell our audience, how do they get in touch with you? How do they connect with you? In case they didn't listen to the first show and they listened to the second segment, I want to make sure they can talk to you.
Mike, just wanted to say thank you for having me today. Really, really enjoyed the conversation. And I feel like this is the dialogue. Going back to what are successful business doing today? They're being relevant. And being proactive, correct. And having that understanding. So I just wanted to thank you, Mike. This has been an incredible dialogue, and this is just, and it's evolving. I think that's why it's intriguing in so many ways.
Agreed.
If anyone is interested, my line is always open. Email is insurance@hellerkowitz.com, HELLERKOWITZ.com. Feel free to email me. My direct line, my office line's always open, 443-471-8614. Happy to help, happy to answer questions, and just appreciate the time.
Stephen Heller, business insurance expert extraordinaire, and my dear friend of 10 plus years now. Thank you for being on the Cyber Savvy podcast. And for our audience, we hope you have enjoyed this and would love to communicate with you more. Feel free to contact us through social media or online. You can learn more at www.dtctoday.com. And remember, at DTC, we make IT work. Thank you all for listening.